I arrived near the Amish farmland at the end of a long summer, carrying more exhaustion than luggage. My job was temporary, manual work, early mornings, quiet evenings, but I had chosen the place deliberately. Silence felt safer than cities where memories echoed too loudly. The land was flat and honest, stitched together by fences, fields, and barns that stood like patient witnesses to generations of routine. That was where I first noticed Eli Stoltzfus. He moved differently from the others, slower, as if each step required permission. While most men worked with efficient detachment, Eli carried a gentleness that lingered. He was tall, lean, and perpetually reserved, his eyes often lowered, not in shame but in careful restraint. When our paths crossed, he offered small nods instead of words, yet those brief acknowledgments felt deliberate, almost weighted. I am Daniel Miller, 27, raised outside faith but never outside doubt. From the beginning, I sensed that Eli's quiet wasn't emptiness, it was containment. We worked side by side repairing fence posts, the rhythm of labor providing cover for observation. Eli rarely spoke unless necessary, but when he did, his voice was calm and precise. He asked practical questions, never personal ones. Still, I noticed how he listened, how his attention didn't drift, how he absorbed words as if measuring them for future consequence. The Amish community lived by rules that were visible even to an outsider like me. Simplicity shaped everything: clothes, speech, time itself. Yet beneath that order I felt a current of pressure, especially around Eli. He carried it in his shoulders, in the way his breath tightened when elders passed nearby. One afternoon, while stacking hay near the barn, I offered him water. Our fingers brushed briefly as he took the bottle. It was accidental, unremarkable by any rational measure, but Eli froze. His eyes lifted to mine for a fraction of a second, long enough for me to see confusion, maybe fear, quickly masked by composure. "Thank you," he said, stepping back. That moment stayed with me longer than it should have. Days passed and familiarity replaced. After the conversation in the barn, something between Eli Stoltzfus and me shifted from fragile to strained. We no longer pretended ignorance of what hovered beneath our silences. Instead, we moved carefully, as if any wrong step might expose us. Yet restraint did not dissolve the connection, it sharpened it. Eli resumed speaking to me, but only when necessary. His words became deliberate, measured, as though he were rationing honesty. Still, his presence lingered. When our hands worked the same task, I felt his awareness before I saw him. When others spoke, his attention flickered toward me, then away, like a habit he was trying to break. For my part, I told myself I was only listening, that I was simply offering companionship to a man burdened by expectation. But denial is a subtle liar. Each day I waited for the moments when we might be alone, convincing myself that solitude was accidental. The Amish routines continued unchanged. Meals arrived on time, work ended with the sun, prayer framed each day with discipline. Yet Eli seemed increasingly displaced within that order, like someone moving through a life he had memorized but no longer inhabited. He smiled when required, nodded when spoken to, and retreated inward whenever possible. One evening, as the others left early, Eli remained behind in the barn, pretending to check tools already accounted for. I recognized the excuse because I had used it myself. When I approached, he did not look startled. He looked resigned. "You should go," he said quietly. I didn't. That was the first conscious choice. We stood several feet apart, the space between us heavy with everything unsaid. Outside, the wind moved through the fields, steady and indifferent. I don't understand why this feels harder than it should, Eli admitted. I know what my life is meant to be. Knowing isn't the same as believing, I replied. He looked at me then, really looked, and something in his restraint faltered. When I'm near you, he said, my thoughts become loud. I pray and they don't quiet. The confession settled between us like a fragile object. I felt the weight of it immediately. The trust, the risk, the line we were nearing. You don't owe me anything, I said, though the words tasted incomplete. After Eli's decision, the days lost their texture. Work continued, conversations resumed around me, but I moved through them as if separated by glass. Eli Stoltzfus kept his distance with discipline that bordered on severity. When our paths crossed, his nods were brief, his eyes guarded. It was not cruelty, it was survival. The wedding preparations became more visible as the date approached. I heard fragments of conversation, lists, plans, expectations, spoken with certainty by others. Eli participated where required, fulfilling his role with quiet efficiency. Yet the ease he once carried was gone. In its place was a careful stiffness, as if he were holding himself together by force of will. I understood then that ending what we had shared had not freed him, it had only clarified the cost. For my part, I began to pack. My work was nearly finished, and staying longer felt dishonest. The barn, once a place of refuge, had become a reminder. Every creak of wood echoed with conversations we would never have again. I avoided it when I could, but absence did not erase memory. The final conversation came unexpectedly. I was loading tools onto a truck when Eli approached, his steps measured, his expression resolved. He asked if we could speak, and for the first time in days there was no hesitation in his voice. We stood outside, not in the barn, as if both of us understood that some spaces no longer belonged to us. I wanted to say this before you leave, Eli began, not to reopen anything, just to be honest. I waited, saying nothing. I don't regret meeting you, he continued, but I do regret not understanding myself sooner. His hands were folded tightly, knuckles pale. What happened between us, what I allowed, it was a betrayal. Even without action, it crossed a line. The acknowledgement carried weight. I nodded. Months passed before the memory of that place loosened its grip on me. Distance softened the sharpest edges, but it did not erase what had been learned there. I returned to a life that looked familiar. New work, new streets, familiar routines, but something in me had shifted, made more attentive by consequence. I often thought of Eli Stoltzfus in fragments rather than scenes, a careful pause before speaking, hands folded as if restraint itself were a language. I wondered how marriage settled on him, whether it fit like a garment he had worn since childhood or pressed against him in quiet moments when no one was watching. I did not imagine drama. Eli had never been dramatic. If there was struggle, it would be silent. I kept no contact. That was a boundary I refused to cross again. Yet absence did not mean indifference. It meant respect for Sarah's life, for Eli's choice, and for the truth that some connections must remain unfinished to retain their meaning. One evening, while sorting through old belongings, I found a notebook I had carried during that summer. Most of it was mundane. Lists, reminders, sketches of fields and fences. Near the end, however, there was a page I had never filled. I sat with it for a long time, pen poised, before finally writing Eli's name. What followed was not a letter meant to be sent, but a reckoning meant to be faced. I wrote about responsibility, how easily understanding can become indulgence when it is not guided by restraint. I admitted that I had mistaken empathy for permission and connection for inevitability. Naming these truths felt necessary, even if no one else would read them. When I finished, I did not feel lighter, but I felt honest. The experience had altered my understanding of